Before the cameras rolled, before the applause, before he became the immortal face of Moses and Judah, Charlton Heston was simply a man of iron discipline, unshakable values, and deeply held grudges. To the public, he was a Hollywood titan, larger than life, noble, powerful. But behind the grand performances and heroic roles, Heston harbored a private list, not of friends, but of enemies. A quiet, burning ledger of names he couldn't forget and wouldn't forgive. In interviews, memoir notes, and recollections shared before his death, 9 names emerged. 9 actors and directors Heston deeply disliked, some for their others for their political beliefs, and some for simply crossing the wrong line. These are the 9 actors Charlton Heston hated the most. It began on the grand set of The Agony and the Ecstasy in 1965. Heston portrayed the driven Michelangelo, Rex Harrison, the unbending Pope Julius II. Their characters clashed in history, and so did the men behind them. Heston was a methodical powerhouse, physically intense, emotionally committed. Harrison was polished and intellectual, approaching the role with calculation rather than passion. The result was friction. Constant, cold friction. Though they never fought openly, there was no hiding the disdain. Harrison avoided Heston during breaks, and the two never worked together again. There were no outbursts, no reconciliations, just 2 legends who never saw eye to eye on screen or off. When you think of Hollywood legends, you probably imagine big egos. But the story of Major Dundee is one of the biggest ego clashes in Hollywood history. And the star was Charlton Heston, who was, let's say, not. When Heston signed on to the film, he thought he knew what he was getting into. He'd done his research, he'd read the script, but nothing could prepare him for The film was directed by Sam Peckinpah, who was known for being, let's say, unpredictable. 4 weeks. Heston held out, watching the production descend into chaos. Then one day, in full costume and on horseback, he snapped. He charged at Peckinpah with his saber drawn. This wasn't a movie scene, it was Heston at his most animalistic. The director would rewrite scenes mid-shoot and often put Heston in dangerous situations. He even gave up his salary to make sure it got finished, not because he liked Peckinpah, but because he believed in the story. Their clash was more than a feud. It was a battle of philosophies, order versus chaos, discipline versus destruction. And yet he stayed in the movie. Actor Frank Langella never clashed with Heston on set, but his memoir revealed a quiet, cutting judgment. He wrote that Heston had the sex appeal of a railroad tie and was as humorless as a CAT scan. Langella's words weren't just insults. They pulled back the curtain on how some saw Heston behind the scenes, cold, rigid, unreachable, revered by fans, yet emotionally distant to fellow actors. Heston belonged to an older school of acting. Precise, stoic, iron-willed, but Hollywood was changing, and too many like Langella, he no longer fit the mold. In the early 1980s, as president of the Screen Actors Guild, Heston faced off against Ed Asner, a liberal icon and advocate for political activism in Hollywood. Where Heston saw SAG as a protector of contracts, Asner saw it as a voice for justice. Their feud became public, clashing in speeches, interviews, and press. Asner accused Heston of silencing dissent. Heston accused Asner of turning the union into a soapbox. It wasn't just professional, it was personal. A war of visions during the Reagan era. One conservative, one progressive, their divide reflected the larger fracture in Hollywood itself. In El Cid, they played lovers, but off-screen, Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren couldn't have been colder. Loren was a star in her own right. But with that came late arrivals, script demands, and luxury requests that Heston, ever the professional, couldn't tolerate. He found her indulgent and difficult. So, when it came time for close-up romantic scenes, Heston refused to even look her in the eye. He used a stand-in. He later confessed that in scenes where he was meant to be gazing lovingly into her soul, he was simply looking past her, into the future. Their on-screen fire masked a real-life freeze that never thawed. 55 Days at Peking was supposed to be a grand epic. Instead, it was a disaster. Thanks, in part, to Ava Gardner. Heston, who demanded discipline and focus, was appalled by Gardner's erratic behavior. She'd disappear for hours, show up intoxicated, or refuse to follow the shooting schedule. One day she went missing, only to be found waving a red cape at taxis in the streets of Madrid like a bullfighter. For Heston, it was the last straw. He begged for her replacement. The studio refused. Despite their tension, they completed the film, but the scenes were stiff, cold, and distant, a reflection of the chaos behind the curtain. This is one of the biggest cinematic tragedies of all time. In 1972, they made a Macbeth movie starring Charlton Heston and Vanessa Redgrave, and on paper, this should have been a masterpiece. But in practice, it fell apart. And so, he called her rigid, and she saw him as inconsistent. There were no fights, no scandals, but the tension was palpable. They simply didn't trust each other's process, and that lack of harmony left its mark on the film. Because Heston, for all his greatness, was a method actor who treated Shakespeare like sacred scripture. You know, he took it very seriously. He believed in the text, but he didn't allow any room for interpretation or improvisation. He was all about sticking to the script, and Redgrave was the opposite. She was emotional, intuitive, and for Heston, this was proof that even great actors can fall apart if they don't respect each other. Charlton Heston and Paul Newman, once friends, forever divided. In the Reagan era, politics tore them apart. Newman criticized Reagan fiercely. Heston stood proudly beside the president. On a live TV appearance, things hit rock bottom. Newman refused to shake Heston's hand. To Heston, that wasn't just politics, it was betrayal. They never spoke again. To Hollywood giants, fractured by ideology, divided until death, in the early 70s, Spielberg was casting Jaws. Heston assumed the lead role was his. He was, after all, Charlton Heston, but Spielberg chose Roy Scheider, a lesser-known actor, to preserve the film's suspense. A big star, Spielberg believed, would ruin the mystery. Heston was furious. He took it as a personal rejection, a message that his name no longer guaranteed the role. When Spielberg later offered him a part in 1941, Heston refused. Not because of time, not because of the script, because of pride. He never worked with Spielberg again. Not ever.